So
Yeah, and Scott, as you pointed out, I mean, when we all get overwhelmed, and so imagine being a high school student, being a first generation student, for instance, and the university is excited. The university community is excited to welcome all these new students to campus, and everyone wants to add their welcome and provide their information. But what it led to was, as Scott pointed out, we did this exercise and we had a group of stakeholders come together, and we said, what are you sending out from the time a student deposits until they show up on campus?
Mm.
And we started with little post-it notes, then we had to move to big newsprint. It was well over 90 different communications within the span of those several weeks between May 1st and mid-August. And you can imagine that families are in and out, they're on vacation, whatever, but you're getting all these emails and all this stuff that's pouring in, and you might see it, read it, and forget it. It's just overwhelming.
Welcome to Student Affairs Now, the online learning community for student affairs educators. I am your host of today's episode, Heather Shea. Today on the podcast, we're going to be discussing effective strategies or approaches that institutions can employ to overcome administrative barriers and promote student success. We're joined by two experts in navigating institutional silos to talk a bit about several cases from their own experiences. Before I bring in our guest today, I'll provide you a little bit of background information on the podcast. Student Affairs Now is the premier podcast and learning community for thousands of us who work in, alongside, or adjacent to the field of higher education and student affairs. We hope you'll find these conversations make a contribution to the field and are restorative to the profession. We release new episodes every week on Wednesdays, and you can find us at studentaffairsnow.com, on YouTube, or anywhere you listen to podcasts. Today's episode is sponsored by Simplicity. A true partner, Simplicity supports all aspects of student life with technology platforms that empower institutions to make data-driven decisions. Stay tuned to the end of the podcast for more information about our sponsor. As I mentioned, I'm your host for today's episode, Heather Shea. My pronouns are she, her, and her, and I am broadcasting from the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of the Anishinaabe, Three Fires Confederacy of Ojibwe, Ottawa, and Potawatomi peoples, otherwise known as East Lansing, Michigan, home of Michigan State University, where I work. I am so excited about today's conversation. I was able to hear Dr. Scott Bass speak at the Council of Higher Education Management Associations, or CHEMA, meeting in May, and I instantly knew that this would be a fascinating topic to bring to Student Affairs Now. So today joining me are Dr. Scott Bass, the author of a new book out last year called Administratively Adrift. Dr. Bass is a professor of public administration and policy and provost emeritus at American University. And we're also joined by Dr. Sharon Alston, the former vice provost for undergraduate enrollment at American University, who during her tenure co-chaired the university's Reinventing the Student Experience, or RISE project. Thank you, both of you, for joining me today for this episode, and welcome to the podcast, Scott and Sharon. That was a really brief intro, but I'd love to hear what else you would like to share about your work together at American University, what you're currently working on and doing in your roles, and how you come to this conversation. So Scott, I'll have you kick us off.
Well, thank you, Sharon, for Heather and Sharon for having me here. My pronouns are he, him, and his. I've been at American University now for 14 years, and I spent 10 years as the provost. I came from the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, UMBC, where I was a dean for 12 years and had the opportunity to work with the President Freeman Hrabowski III. My interest in student life, in the culture of higher education, of education in general, has been something that has inspired me throughout my life. I've been in higher education for all of my career, and I love the institution. But when one really cares about the institution, it also has to acknowledge its weaknesses and seek to make adjustments in that. And I've done that also throughout my career. I was recently reminded of Frederick Weissman's film. I don't know if you've seen any of them. They're cine verite. There's no language, no narrative. It's really a view of institutions and how they behave. And one of his most famous one was Tiddicate Follies, which dealt with correctional institutions. But the one that I was interested in was high school, and it showed an inside of what it's like for a student to interact in a high school without any narrative. And I saw it when I was just finishing high school, and my friend and I decided to take the film and show it at our high school. And I just graduated. The staff were opposed to that, and they eventually agreed to view it as just the faculty of the high school and no one else. So I'm deep into how institutions work. And as a provost, or even before that, but as a provost, it has a unique perch of the institution. I get to see how, unfortunately, delayed in terms of how all things work. And one of the things that we created, which Sharon was part of, was a committee that cut across the functional units of the university, and they bring forward the kinds of stuff of life that people deal with at the level of direct work with student constituencies. And so that helped us eventually move into this subject of what I call administratively adrift. And first, the most important thing is to understand how the university works and how it is, I believe, a substantial mismatch between our operation, functions, and policies and procedures and the life of current students, Generation Z, who were born in around somewhere in the range of 1995 to around 2015, are really in that cluster. And their experiences, all generations are unique, but this one is different. I'd like to talk some about that. So that's a little bit who I am, what I've done, and what brought me to do this book.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that background information and a little bit about an insight onto your career and how you came to this topic. Sharon, tell us a little bit about you.
Well, I always like to say that I'm a native New Yorker, and I'm a first generation college student. So I'm the first in my family to have gone to college. And I won't be as shy as Scott was. My career in education has spanned almost 50 years.
Yeah.
I recently retired, but I served at American University for about 23 years.
Wow.
And I had the pleasure of working with Scott Bass for 10 of those 23 years. And it was wonderful. I remember Scott telling me when he first started that he believed in changing communities. And I will give him the nod to say that I think that he left his mark at American University and changed us in many ways for the better. But this work in particular really resonates with me because I was a first generation college student and I was a financial aid recipient. And even though it was so very long ago, I can still relate to the issues that many of our students experience when they arrive at the university. And it cuts across many universities, I know, but it touches me in a very personal way. And so this is why I was excited about the RISE initiative and the work that we did. As now that I'm retired, I remain very interested in issues around access and success and diversity. I had worked for 7 years as a high school counselor, and I'm currently serving on the board of my high school alma mater, looking at
Wow.
how they are serving their students and transitioning them from high school to college. So I think I'm just always going to be a student in some capacity forever. So that's
I
a little
love
bit
it.
about me.
Well, thank you so much. Both of you, I think, are going to bring some really interesting insights that is, adjacent to and familiar to our audience, but maybe not the water that we typically swim in. So, Scott, I read your book on my Kindle, actually, so I don't have the hard copy to show. But I would love if you could provide a overview for our listeners of the book, Administratively Adrift, Overcoming Institutional Barriers for College Student Success. And you've already talked a bit about what led you to explore the topic, but maybe why did you decide to turn it into a book?
Well, after the experience we had, and let me say that, let me get to how we had the experiences. I came um, to AU at a critical time as a new president, a president who had been at the institution actually as provost, as dean, as even as an undergraduate, as a wife at
Wow.
American University, so really knew this institution. And he basically said that he had done these roles and that he wanted to give me the keys to the institution and that I would work with him to help really accelerate and build the institution. So I had support from the very beginning. The community was supportive. And I sensed right away that the ambition of the institution was divergent from where it was as a setting. And part of that was welcoming a more diverse community to the setting. And so that was my first priority. And we set out, and again, it was just wonderful to have someone like Sharon Alston to share these ideas with and then to implement them. But one of the first things we did, and we involved, a process to do that with the faculty senate, but we made SAT and ACT, the various tests, optional. So that was one of the first things we did. We created a new honors, top honors program called the Frederick Douglass Distinguished Scholars Program. And what we did, and Sharon had this responsibility, was we wanted to change our financial aid approach. And what it was when I arrived was 80% of financial aid was used for merit awards. And what we set out as a goal, and I would bet Sharon did it maybe in a 2-year period, was to switch it, is to move 80% of the money to need. And a number of other presidents and provosts were shocked at that. But you know what? Every one of our metrics improved as a result of diversifying the student population and changing it. And we, different than perhaps a large public, we're a mid-sized research university. Our profile did change quickly, and I anticipated that to be consequences for that change in terms of dynamics on campus. Didn't happen right away, but it was something we expected. So we tried, and Sharon can talk more about that. We learned that it's not just providing financial aid; it's meeting 100% of need, and that's hard to do in a private university with the resources we have. But when we did that, students would graduate. So I'm very proud to say, under Sharon's leadership, that our highest retention cluster are Pell eligible students. They first to second year retention hovered between 89 and 91%. And I'm very proud of that. That was it was hard work and a real achievement. And we found that by providing talented students with the resources they need, that they can be successful. Nonetheless, we then went through Middle States accreditation review, and they pointed out, which we were aware, but that as the campus has changed, one needs to look at the culture of the institution. We have all these wonderful learning opportunities. Are they really available to all students? And do they feel that they belong in setting? And so we went through, we decided to do some workshops, some sessions. And I remember this rather vividly. We brought in a consultant and we had a session with most of the leadership of the campus, faculty, and students. And the consultant was going through the agenda, and at some point some students started speaking up about incidents that occurred on campus, runarounds they had, chafing that they encountered with some of our services. And it started to pick up momentum and actually get somewhat hot in the session. And the consultant stopped the session and broke, and then met with us, all of us, and we decided to change the agenda to provide that opportunity. And I think we walked away, and this is before we created the Reinventing the Student Experience Rise initiative, to realize that we were at sea on a burning platform and did not know it. And I would surmise that every listener you have on this podcast are in a similar boat and don't know it. Is that there's so many issues that take place at the student level with and they either work their way through it or they give up. And so that put us on a path that took 4 years of detailed granular work. I did have a recorder of a number of the events which helped for writing the book. But I also am a social scientist. I study organizations, and I was able to draw on years of knowledge, a lot of library work. This is a 3-year effort to put a book like this together. And so summarizing it is often difficult because there's so many components to making the case as to the mismatch of a generation. And it's not just to critique this book, it was an effort to also identify things that could really move us forward as a nation. And I want to say one of the universals, whether we're large or small institution, is the universal is the administrative structure, the underlying bureaucratic structure that we house, and it is reinforced by the migration of professionals across the institutions, so that we are really quite similar in the way we function and work. We may have slightly different reporting lines, different patterns of how they work, different policies, and certainly different emphases and distinctiveness of our campuses. But one thing that holds universally is that we are a traditional administrative bureaucratic organization following a model of about 100 years ago, created by Max Weber, and it is universal, and that's part of the discussion in terms of Generation Z and the transition that we've seen in other industries outside of higher education. And that was part of our mission as well in the RISE initiative, was to look outside of higher education. So with that as an introduction, I hope that's helpful, and it will allow you to turn to Sharon.
Yeah. I mean, the thing I took away was that the book uses your institution as a case study, but it has so much universal applicability, regardless of the institution that you're approaching this kind of inquiry from. And I really appreciated I appreciated many things about the book, but I really appreciated the ways that you kind of talk about some of the specific institutional barriers, but that they are really universal barriers, and that there are models out there, often, as you said, from outside higher ed, that may be more useful for us to consider.
Well, I appreciate you say that, because I did try to explore, and there are a number of articles. People use different terms
Sure.
for the experiences they had. We came up with the term pinch points for students. We had what was called a Bermuda Triangle, where things would go and get lost. Other campuses had other terms among the students that would two campuses used the name of their campus and the word shuffle. That was the words the students used. So that's why library was very helpful in putting together and drawing from other campuses in terms of their stories and their successes. There are a lot of very successful models, of which I should mention parenthetically, in terms of, actually, we had one of our administrators came up with the idea of a silo busting award, which we'd give every year. But among the community colleges, there's a great deal of awareness, maybe because of the dire need to be responsive, to do that. And ironically, among the institutions that are higher in the traditional pecking order, there's at times less attention to these issues. So vulnerability, seriousness of this often creates action. I should also, one last statistic is to mention that as an industry, just among four-year colleges and universities, we call it 4 years, but of those that really graduate in 4 years, at least from the publics, is about half. It's a little more in the privates. So half don't make it in 4 years. When you break it down by gender, women are more likely to complete the degree in 4 years. And then we break it down by race, and it gets terrifying. Is that among Black men, only about 20% complete the degree in 4 years. Now, that all picks up at 6 years and 8 years, but we're still talking about a tragedy in terms of the way our industry functions. And if we were a private institution, a private company, we'd be out of business. I mean, you can't serve and have half of your people graduate promising with a term of 4-year degree. It's not 4 years. So these are the kinds of realities that we need to face and say, no, wait a minute, what can we do to change this reality, which is not new. In fact, it's gotten a little better in terms of graduation rates by race and gender, but still infinitesimal and longstanding reality that we have to confront. Thank you.
Thank you. So Sharon, let's hear a little bit about your experience and some of the most common institutional barriers that you experienced that hindered student success, and how those particular barriers impacted the student experience.
So, Heather, I did read the hard copy of the book, and I was able to mark it up and highlight it and get use out of it. There are actually a few that come to mind, I think, and Scott touched on these, but certainly the fact that we do operate in silos, and that inhibits how we communicate with students, and it limits the quality of communications with students. We don't use current good methods to communicate with students. Mm-hmm. We're still using email. Kids don't read email anymore. Adults don't really want to read email anymore. In speaking about financial issues, hidden costs, we do fully fund students, but Scott, you might remember that some years ago, we formed a working group, and we looked at what are the hidden costs of having the true hallmark educational experience at AU. And I think the figure that we came up with was that it's about $5,000 over and above the cost of attendance in order for a student to have a good experience. But I think that the biggest barriers, I think, speaking of bureaucracy, really connect or tie to the misalignment of our academic regulations and federal regulations, specifically in the area of financial aid. There's a misalignment. The academic regulations are in place, of course, to be helpful to students, and they're well-intentioned to support students. Financial aid, on the other hand, is heavily regulated by the Department of Education, and we are audited every single year, and we have to report every year, and so there are consequences for noncompliance. And so there's a little bit of a conflict there. So there are a couple of instances that come to mind. The first has to do with satisfactory academic progress. Mm-hmm. So I'm thinking of a young woman who came to the university, very, very talented student, very, very gifted musician, but she was interested in the sciences, at least upon initial entry. She had gotten a merit scholarship because she was so talented. And then whatever the merit scholarship didn't cover was filled in with need-based financial aid. This young lady encountered some challenges with a calculus course in her first semester. It lowered her GPA. In the second semester, she saw that she was having some issues with chemistry and decided to drop the chemistry class, and was actually feeling pretty good about the fact that she was doing okay. She could function comfortably. She took a class in music and was working on a paper about I think it was about around the design of pianos or something like that. and was really doing great with that paper. And in fact, so much so that the professor was very interested and felt, here's a gifted student. I want to give her some additional time to make this a true A paper. And so he gave her an incomplete in order to allow her some time to finish. Well, guess what? She had dropped her credit level. She now had the incomplete. She was really not making what the federal government felt was adequate progress toward completing her program. She was not meeting satisfactory academic progress. She lost her financial aid. And so this sort of set off a whole series of conversations with the donors who gave her the scholarship. You can imagine the stress at the family home if there wasn't a lot of money. You can imagine the student stress, and add to that the fact that the faculty member that gave the incomplete was out of the country. And this young woman had to file an appeal in order to have her financial aid reinstated. The good news is that the financial aid ultimately was reinstated, but it was reinstated only for one semester on the condition that she complete the conditions under which the aid was reinstated in order for it to continue. Now, were there communications with the student? Probably, yes. There were emails or whatever, but again, students don't read email. All the stress could have been avoided if there was better alignment with that that academic regulation and the federal regulation. Another has to do with repeating courses. The federal government actually does allow for students to repeat a course and receive their financial aid. And this is important because there are students who are looking at very competitive professional schools, right? Let's take the pre-med, for instance. You want to get the best GPA possible. So we have the case of a young man who took organic chemistry. He earned a C and then decided this isn't good enough. I need to retake this course because I'm required to get at least a B in organic chemistry. He took the course a second time and got a B minus. Well, that was not sufficient to meet that requirement. When he wanted to take the class again to get the B, Department of Education regulations would say, nope, we've already allowed you to take that class. We allowed you to repeat it. You passed it both times. We're not spending any more money here. You're not getting any more money. So this young man actually ended up, full-time status at AU will take you up to 17 credits. So this young man added that class again. So now he's taking upwards of 17 credits. It was covered by his financial aid. But because he was taking a course overload, his GPA suffered. Now, the inequity in this is that a student who is not an aid recipient could take repeat a course as often as they want to. They're paying for it. It puts the student at a competitive disadvantage. So those are a couple of examples of, barriers and challenges that we're putting up for our students, sometimes well-intentioned, but ultimately it hurts the student.
Let me just follow up on the student, the gifted student. One of the things that the complaint from the student was nobody helped, and it was him or her, with this process. It was a loan. Faculty member, I believe they went to the financial aid, said go talk to the chair of the department. Chair of the department refused to assist the student. And the bitterness of the family towards the institution is just a first-year student's going to have to make an appeal to the federal government. Now, she was asking to financial aid, why didn't somebody catch this? Why wasn't there a flag at the registrar's office? There was no flag. This shouldn't have happened. And the response, what I recall being told, was that the financial aid office indicates to all students what satisfactory academic progress is, and that was the student's responsibility to meet satisfactory academic progress. So that reminds me Sharon, one of the eye-opening experiences you provided us was what exactly do students receive by email or flyers or whatever, even before they arrive on campus, and how you identify that. And I know you created a website eventually, but the point is, sure, this student was told about satisfactory academic progress among what turned out to be as many as 90 other communications at that time. So maybe you go through how you did that, how that lit a light bulb in my mind, what we did, and then what happened following. So maybe that's a useful example of trying to do something but not having the consequence, or having worse consequences than you planned. So
Yeah, and Scott, as you pointed out, I mean, when we all get overwhelmed, and so imagine being a high school student, being a first generation student, for instance, and the university is excited. The university community is excited to welcome all these new students to campus, and everyone wants to add their welcome and provide their information. But what it led to was, as Scott pointed out, we did this exercise and we had a group of stakeholders come together, and we said, what are you sending out from the time a student deposits until they show up on campus?
Mm.
And we started with little post-it notes, then we had to move to big newsprint. It was well over 90 different communications within the span of those several weeks between May 1st and mid-August. And you can imagine that families are in and out, they're on vacation, whatever, but you're getting all these emails and all this stuff that's pouring in, and you might see it, read it, and forget it. It's just overwhelming.
So,
It's
so
overwhelming.
with that information, we set out to try and manage this better and bring that down to what, so that at least the other units knew what they were sending out, and timing, sequencing. There was nobody knew what they were doing across all these different offices. So we attempted to do that, and my understanding, things improved. We had a website. In the year I stepped down, there was another review. Again, it had gotten more organized, and I was told that actually it had bounced back, and there were 130 communications that had gone out that year.
Oh my
So,
gosh.
so
Oh
it,
my
it is,
gosh.
and you
It's it's
Yeah.
an issue of data governance, and you do touch on this in your book too. Um, there were no controls over the database, and so everyone had access to information. And so, in order to get it under control, I'd like to say we wanted to rely on the kindness of strangers. We had to rely on each other to be honest and forthcoming. But because there was no data governance, people could just go in at any given time that they wanted to and pull the
Pull
information
the
that they
list.
need and pull the list and send information to
Yeah.
students. So it's
That's
an ongoing challenge.
Yeah, I think that's a really important case study. And if folks are watching today and haven't yet mapped the communications as you all did, from the point that a student commits to coming to the institution up to, and I'm looking over at my corner of my desk here because I have a student who's about to become a first year student. I have a pile of hand delivered letters, right? Which have gotten a lot more attention because there's physical copies, but at least a dozen or more emails that have come to me as a parent. So I think that's a really important example of an effective strategy that institutions can employ. Scott, can you talk about some more strategies beyond communications that kind of
well,
you illuminated?
I think the most important task in any institution is assessment. In other words, you don't know what to do unless you have information from the various constituents. So I didn't know we would have a problem with 130 communications going out from different offices, and then worse yet is then blaming the student. We told you so, and it's your fault. Is that it's just there isn't a perspective of walking in the student's shoes because nobody has an omniscient view of all aspects of the setting and so many different players. Now, you mentioned the national organization you attended. There are 40 different providers on the administrative side of the institution alone, 40 different entities. And I attempted in the book to chart a number of them. And I didn't know, had I known at the time there were 40, I think I came up with maybe 29 myself just going through websites. So there is a fragmentation, a level of granularity that goes on that is invisible to most members. I don't think the president is aware of what's going on. And then when I look at the different software packages that we use on campus to support each of these different specializations that were created, engineered, and designed without interoperability, we have at AU, actually the chart says 49, we've added a 50th to our databases. The enterprise systems are interconnected, but on the student sides, go through all of the different offices that support student and maintain their own records, and you can be assured either by regulation or by choice, nobody else sees those records. So a student could have, this is the kind of thing that worries me. A student may have had excessive binge drinking at night with a group of students, and fortunately, we have a policy that there'll be no penalty to the student who reports, because we're talking about someone who's going to die unless they get their stuff in a hospital.
Medical amnesty. Yeah.
Correct. We have medical amnesty. So fortunately, if a student then is taken to the hospital, but that remains, nobody knows when the next day rolls around and perhaps maybe the student doesn't show up in class, or if the student does, that all is not well. Nobody knows what's going on except the handful of people that were involved in the incident. Perhaps it was reported there was an incident to the president, that someone was taken to the hospital, but for the most part, nobody can help manage and support and assist in any of the other divisions because it's private. Financial aid, private information, even as provost, I don't know the financial issues. And on the other hand, when we are notified that there's a change, we don't know the details, but if there's a change that the student has lost financial aid or it has been reduced, that's going to have a whole bunch of implications for everybody on the campus. So we are really, really siloed. And so when I start thinking about how we can do better at this through the RISE initiative, we did look outside. I don't know if you want me to go into some of the discussion of some of the ideas besides.
Maybe give an example or two. I think that would be really helpful.
So we found about in our place, and everyone, if they did an assessment, we came up with about 60 items that were chafing students, either from the staff or student points of view. And we were able to make adjustments in improving them. I mean, we have a one-stop center, which a lot of places have, but from the student's point of view, it's the first stop center. And so when I say first stop, is that some of the details that are involved in these things only can be done by the expert in the specialized office. So that's, it's better. I'm glad we have a one-stop center, but it isn't. And the students see it as such. But when we come to these kinds of structural impediments, we can adjust our offices, make them work better, flow communication better, and we've done a lot of that. But when it comes to somebody having responsibility for the success of the student, having accountability for the success of the student, on one hand, everybody's responsible, but that means nobody is responsible. And so a student can drift, a student, sometimes it's nobody's fault. Is that one case was of a student who was depressed, and went to the on his or her own to the counseling center. They did an assessment. It was not a crisis. The student was then scheduled for an appointment in 2 weeks. Student went back. Things got, more and more. Student was very sad. And finally, the appointment came up, and the student got an urgent email saying that the counselor was ill and was out for the day, and that we'd have to reschedule. Student never rescheduled and just dropped out eventually. So it's complicated, and it's not necessarily anyone's fault, but it's understanding what it's like to be in your setting, not my setting. And to do that involves a lot of conversation, involves surveys of students. We did learn through survey the differences in the sense of belonging between Black students and white students. We learned through the surveys about the culture of the setting and how different students felt that the institution cared about them. We learned through journaling projects. One of the case studies in the book was a result in who wrote well, I thought, was a transfer student, and I changed so it could not be identified, but those were her written journal. It was a weekly journal of how she came to the school. It was a dream school, so excited, and how eventually through loneliness and lack of connection, it just ground down. And it's in her words in the book. So there's things you can't necessarily control, but the idea that is well used in other human service agencies is the idea of case management. Is that there is a cross-trained individual who is the point of contact. And we did that initially through guides, but it was an earlier stage of having a guide, is really having someone who has the authority and has the accountability to communicate with the specialists. And it's not to take the jobs away from the specialists, but it is to have a timely flow of information so somebody has a broad overview. So there's two major components to that. One is the creation of a case manager as we know it in other places. The second is what I call the timely flow of actionable information. That's different than the information that these 40 or more specialists have in their divisions. It is and this may involve, because it doesn't exist, is a redesign using perhaps even AI to synthesize what is urgent, essential, and it needs to be immediately given both to the student, again, student awareness, and to a case manager to work through that issue. So it is useful, actionable data we do not have. And your specialist has their information, but nobody else has that who has a broader view of the institution. Now, for example, with the woman or man or woman with the financial aid problem, there was nobody to talk to outside of the group to say, we will provide a temporary financial coverage. These things get to me much too late. I say, well, look, we'll cover that until you find out about it. Don't you worry. Tell your parents that you don't have to drop out of school. We will cover you until this gets resolved. It needs to be clarified. They're simply tools we have that could easily be done in very difficult, turn to be crisis situations. The student who eventually dropped out, perhaps there could have been someone a peer counselor, a phone call coming in, and the student that's chronicled was actually in the book, who just kept going down, was actually a call from her guidance counselor from the community college. That was the most important communication to help her work through the issues. Now, maybe her parents said something. I don't know how it happened, but that's what made a difference. Is somebody who cares, who really cares about you and makes that and has the time and the energy and the resources and the information to do that. So
Yeah.
that's one of the things, and it's then packaged in what's called the Chief Experience Officer. And one of the places we spent a lot of time with, we took an entire busload of the leadership of the campus from Washington, D.C., and we went by bus to the Cleveland Clinic. I said, why would we do that? Actually, one of the vice presidents argued that we should take the bus because that will help bond us a bit who really don't know each other that well and have to work together. And so we rode the bus for 8 hours, including one of the board members, press chair of the board came with us. We spent time there understanding how they transform, a much larger scale, how they transform this very bureaucratic, very large organization in terms of the patient experience. And they took us through all kinds of details for an entire day. And then we looked at how can we learn from that? And part of it was this notion of a chief experience officer. That's someone who is at the president's discretion, works directly with the president or chancellor of the campus, and his job is to look campus, or in this case, clinic-wise, how every single function serves the goal of the president to put patients first in terms of their care, their communication, the message training for everyone, including the most famous surgeons, was around empathy. And to take the time to talk to the patient and have empathy. And so we were meeting with some of the docs, and they say, look, it's improved it takes time, but it's improved my practice, my care of the patients. So it's just little things, saying the name, doing rounds. Faculty don't do rounds, probably do the names, but knowing the student, caring about the student, and what's known as a relationship-centered culture of fostering that even before they arrive are important things to do. Even one example that has been shown at another institution was as students came in, these are likely to be first generation, more vulnerable students of color. They'd write an essay about their experience and their fears, their worries about success in the institution. Students of the same background, advanced students, maybe third or fourth year, would write an essay about how they overcame the obstacles that they encountered and gave that to the incoming class, the incoming group. They then were asked, after they thought about it and talked about it and met with the students, then wrote an essay to future students, how they need to think about coming into the setting and how they can be successful. And they found that was very helpful. But these kinds of techniques of bonding and bringing people together, having pizza with the students when they first arrive, building relationships is an important component. And I said then assessing the setting and making serious changes to improve the culture and climate of the setting is what I think is paramount at this time.
I love that.
And I guess let me mention one other point for your audience is that this generation of students is different. They are the first to be have the opportunity of the smartphone, the benefits of how organizations have changed to provide service and communication and alliances that leveled much of the bureaucracy, made things simple. I still can't imagine how in the world I can go to the supermarket, buy food, and then get points, and then go to a gas station, has nothing to do with that supermarket, and I can get a discount per gallon of gas instantly. I mean, I just push a button. You want it? Yes. And I get the gas. I see it change the price. And I get now, if we can do that level of technology and we can't even communicate with the office next door, give me a break. Anyway.
Well, and I think part of it is part of it is the institution, but I think some of it is also helping students figure out some of these, they almost need like their secret decoder ring. And Sharon, can you talk a bit about some of the tips and advice, though, that you would give to students and maybe those, family support members, parents, caregivers who are in their lives in kind of about ready to either embark upon college or who are facing challenges today?
Um, yeah, I'm putting on my parent hat because I went through this a little bit earlier than you, Heather, but
Yeah.
it's a good experience. I think, I'm listening to what Scott has said. Find a person.
Mm,
Scott was very good about instituting or creating the guide positions. We now call them first year advisors. And so the first year advisors, in effect, are the person. But even if the institution doesn't have that, I think it's important for students and families to find a person. Um, I think for parents, I think it's paying attention to the communications, the information that you're getting from the institution. I think it's encouraging your students to pay attention. I think it's pay attention to your kids
mhm.
and be in contact with them and listen to what they are saying to you about their experience. But I think that ultimately it really just comes down to finding your people. And I think about my colleague at the university who walked the campus. And for those families that she met, she was the face of the university. She remained in contact with them. They would reach out to her whenever their kids ran into difficulty. Certainly one of the things that makes me the happiest is the young woman that I adopted. I call her my other daughter. I met her when I went out recruiting in San Francisco some years ago. She was a first generation Latinx student, and her mom was very concerned about her coming all the way across to the East Coast. And I said, I promise I will take care of her. I will take care of her. And I stuck to that. And, I was in contact with mom, in contact with the daughter all through 4 years, and we remain in contact today. And she graduated. She graduated with a great job. I take no credit for that. She was very talented, but it just comes down to people and making connections and whether there is a formal structure for that or not. I think it's finding people. When you go to orientation, if there's an administrator that that you seem to connect with on some level, make that connection, keep that business card, keep that phone number, stay in touch.
Yeah. Yeah, I was always at a previous campus that I worked at, the dean of students would always tell parents or family members pull out their cell phone and would actually give his cell phone to everybody in the orientation audience. And it was like, if you need to call someone, it's an emergency, right? Obviously, you can call me. And I thought that level of connectivity was really, and it's just one example, right? Of, like you said, with the young woman you mentored, like it, that we care, right? We are here
Mhm,
in this business because we care about students.
mhm.
And our institutional structures don't always help us do that in the most effective way as we would like them to do. We're getting close to running out of time, but Scott, I do want to give you a moment to just talk briefly about policy makers, because I think there's another layer here. It's institutional barriers, and we've talked a bit about, policies like FERPA as well as financial aid policies. But what do you think the role should be for government agencies, and then, of course, professional associations, in trying to support the policy changes that are necessary for us to move forward to a less administratively adrift campus?
So I think the main message is, how do these professional organizations, which are many, engage in a conversation about the challenges we have in meeting the needs and expectations of a generation of students. Having that conversation opens the door. Again, there's so many other immediate issues that are focused in each of the discrete professional units. But there's a broader message. We are all in this together. I mean, our goal is to see the students have success, to not just graduate, but to have a wonderful learning experience, an enriching learning experience, to grow as part of the experience, not just to get the degree. It's more than that. So how can we have a national dialogue that recognizes we're not doing so well on that? I would add that, so that's among the national organizations, and that's a long-term kind of conversation. The other place I look to is accreditation. Accreditation is done. I've served on accrediting committees, gone on the campus and done accreditation reviews, and one of the components in that is the meeting with students. Now, generally, and in my case, the schedules work that representing all the different divisions that we break out into the various silos when we meet on a campus. We were all available at that time slot, and we said, let's all just sit down with the students. Well, it turns out a total of 3 students showed up, undergraduates, of which 2 were reporters for the school magazine. So the going back to the question, questions, how do students participate in these things, is we really didn't have much of a view of the student perspective, but accreditation could be done a little differently. That would require the provost and whoever's the vice provost, vice president, whatever the title is in student affairs, there'd be a protocol that would be done by the accreditation produces the protocol, and we would use that to come back with an assessment. We do a survey where both of us work together and identify issues that are really going on our campus. That seems to me to be a key accreditation piece, and I can tell you it didn't happen on the one I was on, when really no students and no graduate students showed up at all at the graduate session, none. And generally, at some places, the students are primed. They're told what they talk about before they bring in a cherry pick group to talk to the accreditation agencies. I'm saying that's not the way to do this. And to do this is to recognize these components are absolutely interrelated in terms of understanding the student experience, get that information. It's required in accreditation, and then we examine that on the site visit. So that's just a specific example for, I think, accreditation, which is, we take seriously, because you don't pass you with financial, able to use financial aid, or your accreditation status. The most important group, of course, are your presidents and your provosts, who are responsible, and the board of trustees or board of advisors, whatever you have in your structure. Is that this, when we get into really moving from a siloed structure to one that's much more aligned and interconnected around the student point of view, as we talked about in 1937, is that's going to take a lot of time. It's going to take some software work, a lot of software work, agreements across the various divisions and flow of information. And that's a multi-year agenda. And each campus has their own unique culture and style of doing this, but that's where the real rubber hits the road and where it needs to be done. And I want to say parenthetically, again, for this generation, it's not just that they're a digital generation. They've gone through school shootings. They've gone through a pandemic. They've gone through racial reckoning. They've now seen the rebound and the reaction in terms of that. They've seen the emergence and the growth of the far right and extremism. They've seen an event at the Capitol that on all of our cell phones that was just unbelievable. Environmental crisis. We have weather, fire, tornadoes, hurricanes, floods, drought, enormous heat, enormous cold. That's their lives. They understand that, and they're worried about this. And then we add this to a war, a sovereign nation invaded by a nuclear power. This is their world. It's crushing. No wonder they're vulnerable. Before they arrived and before the pandemic, more than half of the women said that in the last 12 months, they felt life was hopeless. This is serious stuff. And to assume after the pandemic, we're bringing everybody back and the business as usual and the offices operate, and we offer more programs and more support, isn't enough. It is a fundamental difference. And so it's not something that's right now. it's for the next decade. We already know the scores are coming in, the consequences for young people, and we need to change the way we do business. And there's a concept in the social sciences of institutional lag. Matilda White Riley did this, and it's been done in mental health and other sectors, is the importance for institutions to recognize this huge gap and to now move the institution. My book is not about how to students adjust to the campus, it's how do the campus adjust to the student. That's
Correct.
the goal. And we need that national conversation. So those are my comments about the outside organizations and the inside leadership.
Mm-hmm. Well, I am so grateful to both of you today for sharing the great work that you did together at American, and then how this is really a case study for all of us who care about students, who really want our institutions to do better by them because of all the factors that you named, Scott. Just, give me a sentence or two as a final thought. And then if you would like to share how or where people can connect with you, if you're on social media or if they can find you on LinkedIn, that would be great. If not, it's fine. And Sharon, why don't we start with you? Kind of final thought.
Final thought. I think that my big takeaway from all of this is really listen to your students.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very sensitive to the pinch points, very sensitive to the fact that most industries would not be in existence today if they did not listen to their customers. And I think that higher education needs to adopt the same kind of mindset. I think that there's a lot that we can learn from other industries. As Scott pointed out, the Cleveland Clinic, we also had a supermarket chain that came in and they talked to us about their customer service. And I think the other thing is to be in the mindset of continuous innovation, right? Our students are changing. We need to change as institutions. And with the innovation, it's don't be afraid to fail. You may try something, it may not work. And I think that our senior level executives need to give us permission sometimes to try something and fail and then reset and try again. But we have to keep trying. So my final words.
Thank you so much.
Students first.
Students first. Great. Thank you. Thank you. Scott, what about you?
So my book is really simply an effort to put the voice out there. As I said, it took a while to put this thing together. I am writing articles as well. It's very hard to write a 3,000 word essay for me. I'm a social scientist, and it's a different kind of journalism, and I'm learning and I'm trying to do it. But I've had a number of articles now published in different magazines to the professionals in the industry, and I want to be part of a national conversation. I want to be part of developing some of the software ideas that would make sense for people who work in the institutions, as opposed to private vendors that are working in corporations and then selling us products that are difficult to use and don't quite connect so well. I do remember a story that Sharon told me on that, and that I have a center here at the university. Sharon is a fellow and can do consultations to campuses. Another person is now a fellow who implemented all of the guide initiatives that we did at American University to provide technical support to other campuses. And a third person has just accepted a fellowship who did the transition from our general education program to a totally different experience in terms of a core curriculum. And how we did that, which is, people describe changing gen ed is like moving a graveyard. So we've lived through that, and that person's available for technical support. So I want to have more dialogue and more communication, and my email is readily available, and a few campuses actually have begun a conversation. So
great. Well, we hope that this episode sparks some additional connection and outreach, and definitely appreciate both of you sharing about the work today. Also, just as always, sending our heartfelt appreciation to our dedicated behind the scenes work of our producer, Nat Ambrosi. Thank you for making us look and sound great. And then thanks also to the sponsor of today's episode. Simplicity is the global leader in student services technology platforms with state-of-the-art technology that empowers institutions to make data-driven decisions specific to their goals. A true partner to the institution, Simplicity supports all aspects of student life, including but not limited to career services and development, student conduct and well-being, student success and accessibility services. And you can learn more by visiting simplicity.com or connect with them on Facebook, Twitter, or LinkedIn. If you will take a moment to visit our website and click on the sponsors link, you can learn more. While you're there, if you're listening today and not already receiving our weekly e-newsletter, please visit our website and scroll to the bottom of the homepage to add your email to our list. Again, I'm Heather Shea. Thanks to all of our listeners and to everybody who is watching. Make it a great week, everyone.